Boker Tov. Do we hear me now? Yes. Okay. Good. Okay. So we're beginning already. Almost going to be finishing 2 months of this war. This is hard to believe. It's very, very hard to believe. But B'chazdei Hashem, we've made a lot of progress on the ground. Unfortunately, we've sustained some losses, and each chayal who falls is a whole world for all of us, not only for the family. We're also in some mode of relief with at least 26 of the hostages who have gotten out in the last 2 days. We know that there's a price for that as well, and I don't want to get into the politics of the decision makers on that score, but certainly we can be thankful together with the families that their loved ones have returned home, and the Mitzvah Hashem, Kadosh Baruch Hu, should allow us the possibility of bringing about a total return of and a safe return of all of the hostages. Exactly how this war is going to pan out, nobody is a novi. We don't know, but we do have certain ideas that from our sources, and you can't get better than Shabbat Parshat Vayishlach of this coming week to give us some inkling on how we handle our affairs. And we just begin with Yaakov Avinu in his encounter with Esav. So prior to their meeting, Yaakov Avinu is in preparation for this encounter, knowing fully well that his reasons for leaving Eretz Canaan at the time were twofold. One was for a shidduch, and that Yaakov Avinu took care of. He marries Rachel. Well, he first marries Leah, but he doesn't know that at first. But he ends up marrying Leah and Rachel, and then Bilhah and Zilpah. And we have the 4 imahot, and we have in Parshat Vayishlach the 12th son who's going to be born, and that is Binyamin. Where in yesterday's Parshat Vayetze, we had the birth of the 11 sons. We also had the birth of Dinah in that Parsha. So from that point of view, when Yitzchak, in the end of Parshat Toldot, sends off his son Yaakov to find a shidduch, that is taken care of already in Parshat Vayetze, and the last son, as I mentioned, is born here in Parshat Vayishlach. But there was another side to that, fleeing from the house of Yitzchak, and that was Rivka telling Yaakov that Esav was planning to kill him because he took the brachot. And now, after over 20 years, Yaakov is returning home, and he knows he's going to have to face up with his brother Esav, and he doesn't have a clue as to what mood Esav is going to be in. And hence, Chazal teach us that Yaakov makes various preparations, and in a phrase that Rashi quotes from the Midrash, "Ledoron letfilah ulemilchama." Doron actually means gifts, and we see in the parsha that Yaakov Avinu sends a delegation to meet up with Esav, and there are many, many gifts that are given. I would translate these gifts into modern-day idiom as the diplomatic route. Before he does anything else, he wants to see if he can solve the difficulties diplomatically by talking it out, by sitting around the table over a cup of coffee and cake, and seeing what the differences are, and if we can resolve them, and so on. So he does this with the doron, with these gifts. The second is tefillah. I mean, we know that anytime we're going to be in a precarious situation, mima'amakim karaticha Hashem. When things are down, we turn to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I mean, the Rambam teaches us something interesting, that we turn to HaKadosh Baruch Hu even if things aren't down. The Rambam tells us that there's a daily mitzvah to turn to HaKadosh Baruch Hu in tefillah, as a biblical mitzvah. Way before the Anshe Knesset HaGdolah entered into the picture in the beginning of the second Beit HaMikdash era, and structured for us the Shmona Esrei, and structured for us 3 time frameworks of davening. Rambam believes from the days of Moshe Rabbeinu at Sinai, we received a biblical commandment to daily turn to HaKadosh Baruch Hu with some request. Fine, and not all of the Rishonim agreed with this, but that's okay. But that was the Rambam's opinion, and he has that. Now, the Rambam believes that there is additional tefillah in a moment of crisis. He gives it a different name. He calls it Za'aka, shouting to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, where it's interesting that the Ramban, Rabbi Moshe ben Nachman, argues with the Rambam on the principle of daily tefillah and says that there is no such biblical commandment of daily tefillah, and the only tefillah that you see in the Torah is crisis moment tefillah, when somebody's in a real jam. So the Ramban says that's when there's tefillah. So for one person, it could be 5 times a day, and for the next person, it could be once in 5 years. So because everybody's life in terms of crisis cycles are very, very different. Whereas the Rambam says, no, there's a daily mitzvah to daven, and we do it today 3 times a day in accordance with the schedule of the Anshe Knesset Gdolah. And indeed, if there's crisis moment, we add tefillah. And whatever the addition might be, it can go along with fasting, with ta'anit, it goes with slichot, it can go with added saying tehillim, whatever that might be. It's a framework that allows us for additional tefillah in a moment of crisis. Our Rabbi Rav Soloveitchik actually once pointed out that we can somehow put together the Rambam and the Ramban and make shalom between the two, because the Rav always believed that on an existential level, a person is always in tzara. The only thing is he doesn't always know about it. That the Rav explained the tefillah of Hashkivenu that we say at nighttime, V'haser Satan milfanenu u'me'acharenu, that God should protect us from the Satan in front of us and behind us. And the Rav interpreted the Satan as moments of danger. So if there is a moment of danger in front of us, danger lurks, not from behind, but we can see it, then you can actually take steps to try to prevent it. If you know that there's an epidemic, you can try to fight it with vaccination and so on, and you can take measures of hygiene so that it doesn't spread. You can do things. So too, with regard to war, you can take measures to sometimes prevent the battle. And in any other area of danger that you see in front of you, human beings are capable of figuring out a way to take proper measures so that we do not fall into the trap. But what happens if the danger lurks behind us and we have no clue that we are in danger? So that's a real problem. We ask Kadosh Baruch Hu, Vaser Satan, not only milfanenu, but also me'acharenu, from behind us. So Rav said that human beings always have dangers behind us, except that we're not aware of them. And hence, even according to the Ramban, who says that we should be davening only in moments of crisis, would have to agree that every day is a moment of crisis, except that we're not sure how to identify the crisis. But that we are in a moment of crisis, the Rav said even the Ramban on a philosophical level would have to agree to this. So the Rav made shalom between the Rambam and the Ramban on that level. So here Rashi is telling us that Yaakov Avinu is involved in the diplomatic side, the doron, the gifts. He's involved in tefillah, which you would expect in a moment of impending crisis, but also he's not satisfied just with his tillim in the hand, but he prepares for battle. Now we know that there's a famous midrash that's echoed by the Targum Onkelos of all things, when the Yaakov Avinu at the end of his life in Parshat Vayechi speaks about how he had to take over the city of Shechem after the story of Dinah and Chamor, Shechem ben Chamor. Yaakov Avinu had to somehow we don't see the battle, but we see that they had to take over the city. And Yaakov Avinu says that he took it over b'charbi u'b'kashti, with my sword and my bow, which means he had ammunition to either side. But it's interesting that the Onkelos translates this based on the Gemara in Masechet Megillah, betzeluti uva'uti, with my tefillot and tachnunim. So you might think that Yaakov Avinu only used tefillah and tachnunim to get the military on his side. No, it's both. It's a combination. You have to have the weaponry. And I explained in the previous shiur, that is the explanation of Eile v'rechev ve'eile v'susim, v'anachnu b'shem Hashem Elokeinu naskir. Yes, we have the susim and rechev, we have the tanks, we have the artillery, we have the air force, we have the navy, we have all this, but we also have the Shem Hashem Elokeinu naskir. We go with the Tillim. And if a Chayal is busy because he's on the battlefield, it's our obligation, we're not in the battlefield, to perpetually say Tillim, and that the Kadosh Baruch Hu should guide the soldiers to victory. So Yaakov Avinu gives us Doron, Tfilah, and Milchama. It's a triangular type of strategy when approaching Esav. What's interesting is that when the meeting actually does take place, so Yaakov Avinu bows down to Esav. Chazal actually thought that he bowed down a little too often, and a Jew is supposed to stand up for his pride, national pride of being OUisrael, and not bowing down. Now, symbolic bowing down, respectful bowing down would have been in order, but apparently Chazal felt that Yaakov Avinu overdid the bowing here to Esav. And what he does is he presents the entire family in a type of parade to Esav. And Esav's like reviewing this parade. So he sends first the Shvachot, the Bilhah and Zilpah, and their children. And then he sends Leah and her children. And she obviously has more than all of the others. And he leaves Rachel for the end. And it does not say that he presents Rachel and her child. Well, at that point, it's only Yosef. Binyamin had not yet been born. He does not present Rachel and Yosef. It says, Ve'achar nigash Yosef v'Rachel. He presents Yosef and Rachel. Now, with all the other wives, he presents the wives first, Bilhah and Zilpah and their children. He presents Leah and her children. And the Torah should have continued, and he presents Rachel with Yosef, her child. But here it says, V'achar nigash Yosef v'Rachel. Yosef is presented before Rachel. And now Chazal teach us in Masechet Baba Batra, a very interesting Gemara. The Gemara says, Vikan she'ein zar'o shel Esav nimsar ela biyad zar'o shel Yosef. The Gemara says in Masechet Baba Batra, it's Daf Kuf Kaf Gimel Amud Bet, that basically Yaakov presented Rachel, and afterwards was to follow Yosef, like all the others. The mother would precede the son, in this case the son. But Yosef jumped in front of Rachel. Yosef did not want Esav to gaze at the beauty of his mother. Now, this was an act of defiance. This was an act of chutzpah for Yosef to do this. I mean, my gosh, he's got his father there setting up the parade in front of Esav, and here Yosef jumps the gun and stands in front of Rachel. So Chazal lauded Yosef for doing this and said that ultimately the downfall of Esav will take place with the children of Yosef. And that is very, very important, which means Chazal interpreted this act of Yosef, act of defiance, act of chutzpah, in a very, very positive way. And the Chazal derived this from a pasuk that we will be reading in the Haftarah this coming Shabbat. Now, this coming Shabbat, there are some chumashim that give you variant readings for the Haftarah, but it's pretty much accepted in most of the Kehilot to read the book of Ovadia. Now, I say the book of Ovadia because the book of Ovadia only carries one chapter. It's in the Trei-Asar, very small book, and it is the entire Haftarah for this week. And it ends with the famous pasuk, Ve'alu Moshiim Behar Tzion Lishpot et Har Esav Vaytal Hashem HaMelucha. Now, we know that pasuk from the Siddur. We say it at the end of Shirat Hayam before Yishtabach every single day. But this pasuk, Va'alu Moshiim Behar Tzion Lishpot et Har Esav Vaytal Hashem HaMelucha, speaks of the downfall of Esav. And in the context of that particular Haftarah, the Haftarah tells us, Vehaya Beit Yaakov Eish, the house of Yaakov will be fire, Ubeit Yosef Lehava, but the flame is going to be the house of Yosef. Ubeit Esav Lekash, and the house of Esav will be straw. Vidalku Bahem Va'achalum, and the house of Esav will ignite and will be consumed. The Lo Yesrid LeBeit Esav, there will be no longer a remnant of the house of Esav. Ki Hashem Diber, God has spoken. And then comes beautiful psukim of how the sections of Eretz Yisrael are going to be occupied. That's a great word in this country, in the political realm, occupied. And it says, V'yorshu HaNegev et Har Esav, the Negev will be inhabited, the Hashpelah et Plishtim, and the area of what today is Rehovot and all the way to Ashdod and Ashkelon, then the days of David Melech, that's where the wars of the Plishtim took place, and they came from Gaza. So somehow there's a reference to the contemporary situation of taking over these lands. V'yarshu et stay Ephraim, et stay Shomron, u'Binyamin et Gilad. So this is all the area that we call today Shomron area, because the area we call Yehuda and Shomron is from Yerushalayim south, all the way down past Hebron, much past Hebron, until the Harei Hebron. You have until not far from Beersheba. You have the Harei Yehuda. So the area of Yehuda is south of Yerushalayim. Binyamin is immediately north of Yerushalayim, and then becomes the section of Ephraim. And we even use those names today on the map of the municipalities of Har Ephraim and Beit Ephraim and so on. They're still used. And then afterwards comes Yosef, which is Menashe, which is basically the area of the Golan Heights, one side, and the area of Tveria on the other side, of the halves of Menashe on one side and the other, which really means, when you think about this, that the key areas of Eretz Yisrael that were given to the children of Rachel, and that is Binyamin and Yosef, they are the quote-unquote contested areas of Medinat Yisrael today, whether it's the Golan, whether it's Yehuda v'Shomron, and Yehuda, okay, so that's already Shevet, that's the son of Leah, and the most prominent son of Leah. Leah with 6 children, the most prominent clearly is Yehuda, and he has from Yerushalayim south. But from Yerushalayim north, it's the contested areas of Shomron, which include really these sections of Bnei Rachel, and they are Yosef and Binyamin. So the Navi tells us that this pasuk of Beit Yaakov Eish, Beit Yosef Lehava, Beit Esav Lekash, it teaches us she'ein zaro shel Esav nimsar ela biyad zaro shel Yosef. Ultimately, the downfall of Esav is going to be through Yosef. Why? What does that mean? Through the household of Yosef. Now, let's just remember that Esav is the grandfather of Amalek. So this is really the climactic ending of Milchemet Amalek, where Kadosh Baruch Hu tells us in Parshat Bishalach, after the first war of Amalek, Ki macho emche etzech Amalek. God will eradicate the memory of Amalek. Now, you may argue and say, 1 second, doesn't it say in the end of the Varim in Parshat Ki Tetzei that we have a mitzvah, Timche etzech Amalek? We have to erase the memory of Amalek. This led some of the poskim to say that eradication of Amalek is not a active mitzvah, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to fulfill the mitzvah at the end of their days. We just have to make sure we get by every single generation. The Rambam disagrees. He believes that every generation that you have your Amalek, you have to do your best to deal a death blow. Last Shabbat, a week ago for Shabbat, I was not here in Israel just for a few days for a very, very important family matter, and that's why I could not be here to give the shir on Sunday morning. But I was in Teaneck, New Jersey for Shabbat, and I spoke a few minutes there about the fact that what we're seeing on what we saw on Simchat Torah, I do not like to hear that this is a Holocaust, a Shoah. I said this at the beginning of the shiurim, the series. I agree with the Yad Vashem that while you might be able to take a frame out of the Shoah and take a look at what happened in Be'eri and the other places in Otef Aza and say this looks vaguely familiar, that you can do, but this is not a Shoah, for sure not. But what you can say, it was a pogrom. It was a pogrom in the style of 1096. It was a pogrom in the style of 1298. It was a pogrom in the style of 1648, 1649, Zerot HaChfatan. Yes, that you can say, but there's one marked difference. In those pogroms, the only thing the Jews could do in the aftermath was to say Kaddish and to say Yizkar. They could not fight back. And today, it is very different. Yes, the Hamas pulled off a pogrom, a very painful pogrom, and we're not going to deal now with the fault, the blame game. That will leave to the politicians and the judiciary later on. But it was a pogrom, no doubt. But in this case, we were able to fight back, and fight back decisively. There's no question about that. And what does the word Esav mean in this context? What does it mean that the act of Yosef, in an act of defiance, was able to stand in front of Rachel in face of the Esav of his day? And Chazal say, this is the act of defiance that will stand in front of the Esav at the end of days. There's a Mishnah at the end of Masechet Sotah that tells us that prior to the coming of Mashiach, there will be a period called in the footsteps of Mashiach. In Aramaic, it's called Ikvata de Mashiach, Ikvot HaMashiach, in the footsteps of Mashiach. Mashiach's coming. And it gives various signs that we could look for. And the first one is Chutzpah Yaska. Chutzpah is going to reign supreme. So I tell you, friends, we're here. We have arrived at the days of great chutzpah. The state of Israel was predicated on an act of chutzpah. The Rav once said that if Ben Gurion didn't have chutzpah, he would not have announced the formation of the state on the 5th of Iyar in Tafshin Chet in 1948, because so many of our friends in the world told us not to do it on that day. Hold off a little bit. And the question would be, hold off. And Ben Gurion always said, what do you hold off till when? You're always going to tell us to hold off. So we just have to do it. And they did it right away. And that was an act of defiance on the world scene. But we have seen today many acts of defiance. And even in the context of what's happening in this particular war, there are moments that our government is going to have to stand up against the wishes and whims of whether it's the Europeans, whether it's the United States, whether it's the United Nations. We're going to have to stand up and do what we think is correct. Obviously, we're going to try to do things as politically correct as possible, but the bottom line is we're going to have to do things that will be appropriate for ourselves. Now, with regard to this idea of Yosef, comes along an idea developed by Chazal called Mashiach ben Yosef. So we talk about Mashiach, so we always talk about Mashiach ben David. The Davidic line of the monarchy will be restored. Rabbi tells us in the very end of the Mishneh Torah, in the 11th chapter of the laws of Melachim, of monarchy, says, HaMelech HaMashiach atid la'amod lachzir malchut David liyoshna. The Melech HaMashiach is going to restore the Davidic line of the kingdom. And there's everything about David HaMelech, where you see it in Yeshayahu, who talks about in the 11th chapter, V'yatzah chotem migeza Yishai. It will come from the trunk of Yishai, which is Yishai, the father of David, of course. And you see it in chapter 37, Lamed Zayin of Yecheskel. The David Avdi Melech Alehem. David, your servant, will rule over you. So what does it mean, David HaMelech? So yes, there's an opinion that says that David HaMelech, that the Mashiach time is also going to be connected with resurrection, with Tchiyat HaMeitim. The Ramban believes this. And therefore, David HaMelech is going to come around once again. But most do not accept that. The Rambam says that Tchiyat HaMeitim is an era way beyond the era of Yemot HaMashiach. So the Navi is talking about a descendant of David HaMelech. The David Avdi Melech Alehem speaks of a descendant of David HaMelech. So it's the Davidic line being reconstituted, restated, and this will be the Melech HaMashiach who will build Beit HaMikdash and so on, and cause everybody who couldn't come on Aliyah until that day to come to Eretz Yisrael. Fine. What's Mashiach ben Yosef? Who is this? Is it a person? Is it an era? Is it a concept? We're not sure. The Chazal speak very vaguely about Mashiach ben Yosef, and the Rambam never mentions it at all, even though it's mentioned in various midrashim. I did a scan just before the shir of all my sources. Now, I'm not the biggest expert in all of the Rambams, but I have a computer and it does the legwork for me. And I went for every single Rambam source that we have available today and to see what he had to say about Mashiach ben Yosef, knowing that in the Mishneh Torah he says nothing. And it turns out that in Moreh Nevuchim he says nothing, and in the Mishnah commentary he says nothing, in the Sefer Mitzvot he says nothing. In all his famous letters, Geret Teiman, a Mamar Kiddush Hashem. And he's writing to the Yemenite Jewish community often about Messianic times. Not a word about Mashiach ben Yosef, which is rather startling that the Rambam literally has nothing to say about Mashiach ben Yosef. So that's okay. He doesn't see this as an integral part of the tradition that there has to be an appearance of Mashiach ben Yosef. But the one who tried to give some understanding to Mashiach ben Yosef was Rav Kook Zatzal, and that was in a hesped, in a eulogy that he gave in 1904 for none other than Herzl. For Herzl, Benjamin Zev Herzl, Rav Kook delivers a hesped. And in this hesped, while he doesn't call Herzl Mashiach ben Yosef, he does identify the era of what will be present at the time of Mashiach ben Yosef, and is more than suggestive that what's happening in the beginning of the 20th century, and you have to realize that Rav Kook goes on to live till 1935, and he sees things developing. He sees the Yishuv in Eretz Yisrael being built. He does not live to see the emergence of the state of Israel, as we, Baruch Hashem, are here, and the unity of Yerushalayim, and expansion of the borders, and so on. We are way beyond what Rav Kook saw, but nevertheless, the Rav Kook was a visionary, and he speaks of the two different types of Mashiach. The Mashiach that will prepare Eretz Yisrael on the material level, and then there's the Mashiach that will advance Am Yisrael to the upper spiritual levels of what we call Mashiach times. So with regard to Mashiach ben Yosef, he says, let's take a look at Yosef in Mitzrayim. Yosef becomes appointed the vice king in Egypt, second only to Paro. And he has two particular jobs. He's called the Mashbir. So Mashbir, people know that as a store in downtown Yerushalayim. But the word Mashbir means feeder, shever, where Parshat Vayeshev, where Yosef is sold to Mitzrayim, and then the Yaakov, there's a famine in Mitzrayim, and Yaakov sends the sons down to Mitzrayim for food. Vayar Yaakov sheyesh shever, there is food, there's food. So therefore, Mashbir is the one who's the provider of food. That's where the store got its name, Mashbir. But the provider of food, and that means Yosef has an economic position in Egypt to be the food provider. And you see that takes place after the dreams that Paro has, that there's going to be famine in Egypt. And Yosef suggests a very pragmatic plan of action of how to guarantee the survival of the Egyptian people. And obviously Paro is very impressed, and that's why Yosef is elevated to a great position. So he's also a mashbir, he's also a shalit. Shalit is already a political situation where Yosef had power. He had enormous power in Mitzrayim. So Rav Kook says that the point of Yosef was to give Am Yisrael a tasting of political power and economic independence, or economic abilities to run a country. Because you can't run a country unless you have those abilities of power, and power means army and so on. So this was in Yosef's, let's say, in his with his abilities. He is now given those opportunities to demonstrate that he can lead the family ultimately in these two great areas. Rav Kook says this is what's going to happen at the days of Erev Yemot HaMashiach, on the eve of Yemot HaMashiach. Am Yisrael is going to have to learn how to leave the Galut. Now, leaving the Galut means leaving a scenario where you are basically attached to a foreign country, and you're surviving with the ground rules of the host country, whatever the host country may be. Now you want to set up an independent country. So you have to learn how to run an independent country. You have to know how to set it up with proper economic structure, with proper political structure, proper military structure. All this is Mashiach ben Yosef, says Rav Kook. And he believed that Herzl kicked off the process. And it's interesting that the Vilna Gaon actually does write about, he has a sefer called Kol HaTor, where he talks about messianic ideas. And he believes that when Chazal spoke about the Mashiach ben Yosef, they did not necessarily point a finger at a person. It doesn't have to be an individual. It could very well be an era. And to this light, Rav Kook builds on, where he says that the Moshiach ben Yosef is going to be an era. And he says that Herzl, with the First Zionist Congress in 1897, basically kicks off a process that's going to lead to the emergence of an independent Jewish state. And obviously, the Jewish people are going to have to get their act together and going to have to learn how to create an economy and create an infrastructure of army and create an infrastructure of government. And all this is Mashiach ben Yosef. And here, Rav Kook in 1904 is in a prophetic way prophesying that which Herzl kicks off is ultimately going to usher in the era of Mashiach ben Yosef. So again, Rav Kook, if those people will think that Rav Kook thought that Herzl was Mashiach ben Yosef, he never says that in the hesped, in the eulogy. But he definitely is more than suggestive that what Herzl did accomplish is something that will usher in the era of Mashiach ben Yosef. And Rav Kook believed that he was already living that era. And I say again, he dies on the 3rd of Elul, 1935. And we, for sure, are in this era, compounded, even to the 100th power, beyond anything that Rav Kook ever could imagine in his own lifetime. So this is the Mashiach ben Yosef that will ultimately conquer the Esav of our generation, which means you have to have a strong country, you have to have a strong army, and Baruch Hashem, Kadosh Baruch Hu has allowed us to come to this day. Now, we don't make a shechiyanu for winning a war. In Tehillim it says, "B'nefol oyivcha al tismach." We do not celebrate the fall of the enemy, but nevertheless we can feel comfortable, more than comfortable, that a Kadosh Baruch Hu allows us to be able to bring down the enemy, and we are going to do this. We are going to do this, no doubt. My son was then for the last 7 weeks on the fronts of the north, believes that it's only a question of time that we're going to have to deal with the Hezbollah in the north as well. And the country obviously made a strategic decision to hold off as long as possible until we finish what we have to finish, our work in the south, in Gaza. And then we're going to turn our attention to the north. And we have to deal with that as well, because we have people in the north, whether it's in Metula and Kiryat Shmona and various Yishuvim in the near the northern border, who have been evacuated, and they have to go home and not live in terror. So this is something we're going to have to do. And I remember when my son was in high school, it's a good 20 years ago, where then the president of Iran was threatening to drive us into the sea. And my son told me, Abba, this is not 1939. We have kelim mikelim shonim. We have things in our arsenal today, citing a pasuk in Megillat Esther. Says we have kelim mikelim shonim. We have things in our arsenal today that the president of Iran knows all about that too. So that's why we can, sleep comfortably at night. And this is what I told the people in Teaneck, New Jersey, just a week ago, Shabbat. I said the only thing people could do after those pogroms was say Kaddish and Yizkar. And today we can fight back. And it's a very, very, very big difference. And it's also very consoling, no doubt. Very, very consoling. I just want to end with another point that the Rambam makes. There's another point that's actually midrashic, and says about Yosef that he marries Osnat, and that she's the Bat Potiphera, and that's mentioned already in the Chumash. A question of who is this Osnat? So there is a midrashic idea that she's actually the daughter of Dinah. In the relationship between Dinah and Hamor, Shechem ben Hamor, there's a daughter that's born out of this relationship. And her name is Osnat, and she ends up being sold down to Egypt, and she's the daughter of Potiphar. She's in the household of Potiphar. And Potiphar marries her off to Yosef. And it was Yosef who discovers in this medrash that she had some amulet detailing the story of where she hailed from that showed that she was part of the family and a worthwhile shidduch for himself. And this is just amazing. I mean, Darshanim, homiletics, can really go to town to try to explain what this is all about. But it's in the Targum Yonatan ben Uziel on Parashat Vayeshev that says that when Yosef had two children, Vayit Yosef benin be'ara de Mitzrayim, Yosef had children in Egypt. The Leidat Lev, who gave birth to the children, Osnat bat Dina, Osnat, the daughter of Dina. Now, this could, my humble opinion, can only mean that there's some type of a merger here between the family of Rachel and the family of Leah, because Rachel and Leah in Sefer Breshit are unfortunately not together at all, putting it mildly. I mean, Leah feels the enmity, feels that the favoritism that Yaakov has shown to Rachel, and so on, and even shows up in the names. Kira Hashem Kira Ra'ashet Ami. God saw my pain. Shimon Ki Shama Hashem Ki Snua Anochi. God sees that I'm the hated one. You can't accuse Yaakov of hating Leah, but this is what Leah felt because of the love that he showed for Rachel. And Levi, Ata Apam Yilavei, she now maybe he's going to pay, maybe Yaakov is going to pay some attention to me. I have 3 sons already, and Rachel has nobody, no sons at the moment. So you see, Rachel is going through great agony here in Sefer Breshit. But at the end of the day, Yosef causes some type of approachment between the house of Leah and the house of Rachel by he being the son of Rachel, and he's marrying off a daughter of Leah, which is amazing, that kind of idea. But the idea of unification does take place in what we're going to read in the Haftarah in Parshat Vayigash from Sefer Yecheskel, and that is the tree of Yosef, Ephraim and Yosef, which is Yosef, and the tree of Yehuda, which represents Leah. They're going to merge together into one tree. So that which broke up the households, and we know that the Malchut Beit David was Yehuda, but the Malchut that split after Shlomo HaMelech was Yeravam ben Nevat from Ephraim, and we know that Ephraim does have claim to monarchy. Moshe Rabbeinu appoints Yeshua, who's from the tribe of Ephraim, which comes from Yosef. So there's something there, that there's some monarchy in the house of Yosef as well. And Yeravam ben Nevat begins the Malchut Yisrael, and he's from Ephraim, and that's why Ephraim becomes the symbol of the northern kingdom when Yirmiyahu talks about Haben Yakir Li Ephraim and the various references to Ephraim in Tanakh. Here in Yecheskel, the Haftarah of Parshat Vayigash is the merger of the house of, or the tree of Ephraim and the tree of Yehuda, which is the merger of the house of Leah and Rachel, and ultimately the merger of Am Yisrael to one tree. It'll ended up being one tree. We are a fragmented people right here in Israel, not in a Shevet sense. Nobody's walking around saying they're from Shevet Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, and so on. But on various levels, very fragmented. But this war put us all together. It really put us all together. And hopefully, when this war will come to an end, Am Yisrael will be wise enough to know that even in peacetime, we should remain one people, as Ata Echad B'Shimcha Echad, Mi Ka'amcha Yisrael, Goy Echad Ba'aretz. We should have a good week, a peaceful week. We should hear Besorot Tovot on so many different levels. And the Kadosh Baruch Hu should send Tanchumim to all the families who require Tanchumim, and send a refuah shlema to the many, many soldiers who are wounded and recuperating in various hospitals here in Eretz Yisrael. And the Kadosh Baruch Hu should allow us to see all the chatufim, all the hostages come home, b'shalom, speedily, b'karov, and Kadosh Baruch Hu should give us all the bracha of Hashem, Yivarech et Amo, Bashalom. Have a nice week. Kol Tov.